friends, welcome back to the Craft Castle. My name is Ashley, and do you like my large wood cutout? This right here is 36 inches long. I cut this out on my Xtool P2 using the automatic conveyor feeder. That thing is actually really cool. I'm going to show you how we use this thing. I'm also going to show you what not to do, because I have learned while testing it out that there's a couple troubleshooting things that I think you might run into. So I'm going to show you what not to do so you know when you're using yours what not to do, and then you don't have to troubleshoot. I'm also going to do a couple tips and tricks for you because I've learned some things along the way. Are you ready to make a really large cutout like this? I'm so excited. Let's get started. Okay, we're going to start a little backwards today, and I'm going to start with a troubleshooting tip just because this is actually really important. So when you feed your material in and you want to do a really large cut, there's one very important thing that you're going to have to keep in mind. These rollers right here is what feeds your material. So if your material sucks all the way in and goes past these rollers like that, what happens is now your material is free moving. And when it goes to go back, it will not be able to because the machine will not be able to suck it back in. So that being said, you always want to make sure that your material that you are using is going to be longer than the cutout that you're cutting out. I have figured out the golden rule for this is, let's say I'm doing a 30-inch cutout. I'm going to need at least 36 inches of wood, and that just is going to be the buffer to where your material will be able to still be fed in and out with your feeder and not get lost inside of these rollers. I'll explain more here in a minute, but just know that if you're doing a cutout, you're going to need at least a buffer of 6 inches on the back side in order to do a large cutout. Okay, now let's go over to the computer. Okay, so when you first load into Xtool Creative Space, this is what your screen is going to look like. Now, you're going to notice that I totally skipped a how to assemble the conveyor feeder. I can tell you right now that I would probably have done a very poor job at that. You're just going to want to go to Xtool's website. They have a video, and it's actually pretty informative. Or they have 2 booklets for assembly instructions. You're going to want to use those. Okay, so this is what your screen is going to look like. What you want to do is come over here to slats flat, and you're going to go to the conveyor feeder. Okay, so when you're in the conveyor feeder portion, this is what your screen is going to look like. It is going to look really funky. If we zoom out on this, we have a grayed out portion, we have a colored area, and then we have our grid. It's going to look very weird. Here's something that I have figured out. This grayed out portion means pretty much absolutely nothing. However, you are going to need to put your material in this grayed out area in order for you to do an autofocus. I'm going to set up a cutout and walk you through things here in a minute, but just know that grayed out thing really truly means nothing outside of you need to have some sort of material in there in order to autofocus. Secondly, this colored area right here is where the laser machine starts. So at this line right here, if you put your cutout to this line, that means that your cutout is going to start at that spot. So it may seem like you would want to put your cutout right here. However, if your material starts right here, you're going to have a decent gap. Again, we'll go through that here in a second. And then everything on the very bottom of this is just going to be the capabilities of what you can cut with your conveyor feeder. So we're going to go all the way down, and we have a lot of inches that we can cut out. Now, the one thing that you want to keep in mind is we can cut out this many inches long. However, your Xtool is only capable of cutting out 20 inches wide. So we can do a 20-inch wide cutout by however long. Okay, so let's just set up a name. So I'm going to go into text box, and I am just going to put any name inside this text box. Okay, just to make things easy for me and for you, I'm just going to use my last name. Very creative, right? Okay, you could use any name that you wanted to. The very next thing you want to do is change your typeface or your font over. So I'm going to be using a cursive font. Okay, so this is the font that I'm using. Now, I have noticed that my F is not connected to the rest of my last name, which if you were to cut this out, your F will not be connected in the final product. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste my text box. In the second one, I'm going to delete just the F. And then in that first text box, I'm going to delete everything but the F. Okay, I'm going to select the ALCO in my last name, and I'm going to slide it over to meet up and touch the F. So right now it looks like it's overlapping. That's exactly what we want. Okay, now that I have them connecting, I'm gonna go back into the first text box and I'm gonna come down here and press weld. So that means that everything is nice and connected. Then what I'm gonna do is selecting that first text box and that welded, now welded text box. I'm gonna come up here to combine and then unite. So we have just welded everything together. Okay, now that we have that done, what I am going to do is I'm going to size this into the Xtool work bed. So I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller, and we're going to turn this over to the right. So we're at a 90-degree rotate. Let's zoom out. And I am going to start my cutout at the start line of our cutting. So do you see this line right here where it's grade and then color? We want to start on the bottom part of that line. So right here, if I put this right here, this is where my material is going to start cutting. It will make sense when we do it in real life application here in a minute, but just know you want your cutout, whatever it is that you're cutting is going to start at this line. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this bigger. If I made this the full width, it looks like I'm going to be able to get almost a 38-inch cutout. Now, remember what I said about your material length and buffer. So this cutout is 38 inches, and I just measured my board, and my board is 48 inches. So in theory, I should have a long enough piece of material to do a 38-inch cutout. Now I say in theory because you need 8 inches off the back, but it also matters on where you start your material. So if you start your material pretty far up here, you've lost more than 8 inches. So depending on where you start your material and your cutout is how much you're gonna need on the back end. Again, when I put this in real life application I show you on the machine, it'll make more sense to you here in a minute. One thing that I have figured out is if you are unsure if you have enough material or if this is going to work, before actually cutting this and wasting any material, what I suggest doing is taking your power all the way down to 1, and let's just bump up the speed to 160. And we are going to trick the machine into thinking that we actually want to do something, but all we're going to do is we're going to be using our eyes, and we are going to watch to see, is our material going to get sucked all the way in? Are we going to have any hiccups? Is things aligned? All of that stuff. So before we do anything else, I want to do a score. Now let's go back over the conveyor and I will show you how to feed it into the machine. Okay, so here is my piece of wood. You're gonna wanna make sure and have your conveyor all the way pulled up so you can nicely slide your material in. Now you wanna make sure that you line up your material using the roller, the lines that are on your conveyor feeder. This just helps to make sure that everything is nicely aligned. When you have that done, what you want to do is lower your feeder. Okay, so in the Xtool Quick Start Guide, there is this chart right here that I actually find very useful. The other tool that I find really useful is a digital caliper. That just ensures that we know the thickness of our material. So for this piece of material, it is 5 millimeter. So for this right here, I'm using plywood and I'm doing 5 millimeter. So in between the 3 and the 6. So my pressure level needs to be in between the yellow and the red. So what I'm gonna do is lower this right here. There is like this, it looks like a level, but it's going to turn color. So I wanna keep turning this until my material shows the color that it needs to be. Because I'm doing 5 millimeter and it's going to be in the middle of the yellow and the red, I just put my color in the middle of the yellow and the red. Okay, when you have that done, then all you want to do is use the bottom knob of your conveyor and we're going to feed our material in. And I'm going to put it in pretty far. You can see it starting to appear right here. because I need to be able to auto measure this. When that's done, you just want to close this and we'll go back to the computer. Okay, so now that we've put the material in there, what I want to do is press this refresh button. Okay, remember what I said earlier. The gray portion of your screen, so this portion right here, that is where you're going to need to put your material in order to do the auto focus feature. However, your cutout is going to start at the very edge of this line right here, where that grayish portion meets the colored portion. Everything else past that is just what we're going to be able to cut out. So the very first thing I want to do is choose my material, which is going to be that pine plywood. Then what I want to do is autofocus. So I'm going to take this little button and I put it on top of my material that's inside that gray area. Okay, now that I have that done, remember what I said about having a minimum 8 inches off the back. This will get kind of confusing, but I'm going to try and explain this to you as best as possible. So I've already showed you what it looks like at the back of the machine with the conveyor rails and how if it were to get sucked in through the rollers, you're going to have some issues with your material, right? But I said a minimum of 8. That is because technically the way that this material is set up is our material is right here. Our cutout is going to start right here. Now that we have it auto focused, what I would suggest doing is backing your material out until it meets this gray area. So what I'm going to do now, I'm not going to touch anything with the autofocus. I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to back out my material a little bit. Okay, so when I have that done, what I'm going to do is just press refresh. Okay, and then you can see that obviously my material is going to be right here. That gray line is where things start to cut, and then I have my cutout. My cutout, the way we can see it on the screen, is that my cutout is going to get cut off because it's going to be right here. You could do one of two things. One, you could slide this down until it, just barely gets this material. Or what I am going to do is go back to the machine and put my material back in to about where the gray line is. Okay, so when I have that done, I'm just going to press refresh. Okay, and then you can see that the gray line is right here and my material is just over that. That's okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my cutout up a little bit closer to that gray line. So if we zoom in, our cutout is going to start pretty much to the edge of that piece of wood. Now, the reason why I'm choosing to do this is I did say a minimum of 8 inches, right? If we were to have like a big gap at the front of where the wood's going to start and then our cutout, and then we're going to try and also estimate the 8 inches off the back end, it may get a little confusing on how many inches we're going to need off the back end. So in order to do less estimation, I am just going to go and hug the very front of my material with the end of my cutout. So pretty close. And then I'm going to say, okay, I need at least 8 inches off the back end. So hypothetically, if everything is set up correctly and I have done my math, this right here will work. Now, because I want to figure out like, hey, did I do this right or not? That's where we're going to do the score thing. So we're going to run a score test first before we fully commit to a cut. So with that being said, we're in the score. We've set up our power, speed, everything that we need. Then you just want to press process and then press start. Okay, at the machine, I am just going to press this button. So there's going to be light marks in your cut, but that is okay. What we did notice when we were doing this is that the material fed all the way to the very end of this. It did get close to the edge. However, because I did my math correctly with that 8 inches and then starting at the very base of my material, everything fed very nice and good and we didn't have any issues. Now let's go back to the computer. Okay, the beauty of having just that faint little line is that if we did mess up, we could have stopped the cut and we could still be using that same material. If you wouldn't have changed the settings, you would have ruined the material. Ask me how I know. Did it a couple times. Okay, We're not going to touch the material at all. We are just gonna press OK. Now what I want to do is I want to cut this out. So at this point, I am just going to go into material and I'm gonna choose the pine plywood, and then I'm gonna select my cutout. At this point, I want to go over to cut. Now, these are the settings that I'm going to use for the wood that I am using. Now, this thing right here that says tab generation, you are going to need to use this when using the conveyor feeder. So we need to press on. At this point, you are probably trying to figure out what in the world that means. Don't worry, I gotcha. So I have a test cutout right here to show you the differences between that. Now, in general, if you have done normal wood cutouts and you're on your slats or even your honeycomb, it's gonna cut everything out, and then eventually pieces are gonna start to drop, right? Because you cut it out properly. However, when you're using the conveyor belt and you are doing a really long piece, you're gonna have really big pieces to cut out. Case in point, like with that baby cutout that I had before, we had this huge cutout that got cut out. Now, if I were to have just cut this out like I would using the honeycomb tray or your slats, what would happen is this gets fed up into the conveyor feeder and ends up ruining your cut. Ask me how I know. I have been practicing and I have messed up. So in order to avoid your cutouts from falling out and ruining your cut, you need what are called tabs. So what they look like, and how I was trying to explain this to my husband because he knows nothing about lasers, is tabs kind of mean hiccups in the laser. So the more tabs, which this is the most tabs that you can select, do you see how in this line there's like a line, hiccup, line, hiccup, line, hiccup? And then in this one there's less hiccups in there. So what would happen is let's say this got cut out and we're done with the cutout. Now all you would need to do is push them out. The downfall of this, and you can especially see this on a piece of wood that's white on one side and black on the other, is do you see my cutout? You can see those lines right here. That's the downfall of doing the tabs. The more tabs, the harder it is to push your material out. Like this one won't even push out. When I did my baby cutout, I did 2, and you can see that there is like one right here and one right here. That is just going to give you 2 cutouts for the entire thing. So I don't really know what the magic number of how many cutouts you need. I don't think 2 is enough for how big of a cutout I'm doing. However, I did 50 on this white one, and I think 50 is a little excessive. So, and Xtool, in their explanation of how many tabs you should use, they essentially say the bigger the cutout, the more tabs you should do. That's probably true, but 50 I think is quite excessive. So this time I'm gonna do 4 tabs. I think 4 is going to be okay. You can make the tab sizes smaller or change the power of it. I didn't touch it the last time, so I'm not going to touch it this time. Okay, if everything is set up correctly and everything looks good, supposedly, let me just press refresh one more time. It looks like my cut is going to line up with my score lines that I have. I have my settings correct. I don't need to autofocus again because I've already did it the first time. So then I'm going to press process, and then I'm going to press start. And at this point, we are going to say a little crafting prayer, and we're going to go over to the Xtool and press that start button. Over on the Xtool, all you want to do is just press that start button. And we are going to cut out our cutout. we have it completely cut out, what you can do is taking your conveyor, we can just remove this from our Xtool. Now you definitely want to be gentle. You don't want to break your nice cutout that you just created. And I am just going to pop out my cutout. Remember, we're going to be very gentle. Okay, so now what you want to do is nicely and gently punch out the inside portions of your cutout. Remember, with thin font, it is very fragile, so you don't want to break your cutout. Now this is our finished cutout. Remember, it is flimsy because it is a thin cursive font, but now we have a full cutout with 0 issues. And because we did not move where those initial score lines were after we did everything, we don't have any additional weird lines anywhere. And now you can just go ahead and paint this or stain this or leave it natural. Looks so stinking cool, and it's nice and big. All right, y'all, I sure hope I inspired you to create, and I'll see you later.